£1,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good evening, it's 6 o'clock. This is Dewbs & Co. I'm Bev Turner in for Michelle tonight. So, Rishi Sunak has defended J.K. Rowling after she highlighted the ridiculousness of Scotland's new hate crime bill. And breaking news, the writer will not be investigated by police for her tweets. And are Generation Z, that's the under-27s, too lazy to work? Well, 25% of them are not working or studying. Managers say they are a nightmare. Is that your experience? But why might they be so lazy? And if you own a second home, you could see your council tax rise by 80% next year. Is this the way to save communities from out-of-towners nicking all their houses? Or is it a tax on hard work and individual success? And Tenerife residents are ready to take to the streets to protest about you lot, about all of us, Brits abroad, eating burgers instead of paella and not caring apparently about Spanish culture. Are Brits abroad behaving badly? And if so, why? And certainly not behaving badly. We've had a message from a certain sun-kissed someone.
Hello, Bev and Co. I heard all the rumours about the Canary Islands.
Well, more of that to come, so stick around to hear Michelle's take on British tourists abroad. All that in the next hour, but first the very latest news headlines with Polly.
Bev, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that Lord Cameron has told his Israeli counterpart today that major changes must be made to make sure the safety of aid workers in Gaza is complete. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the killing of 7 aid workers, including 3 British nationals, as tragic and unintended. They'd been delivering vital food supplies travelling in 2 armoured cars marked clearly with the World Central Kitchen logo. The aid group claims the attack was carried out despite them coordinating their movements with the Israeli military. Well, today, Israel's Defence Minister has said a new situation room will be opened with international groups to facilitate the safe delivery of aid. But here, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is calling for a full investigation into what happened.
Shocked and saddened to hear the reported deaths of aid workers in Gaza. We're urgently working to confirm all the details, but my thoughts right now with their friends and family. They're doing fantastic work bringing alleviation to the suffering that many are experiencing in Gaza. They should be praised and commended for what they're doing. They need to be allowed to do that work unhindered, and it's incumbent on Israel to make sure that they can do that, and we're asking Israel to investigate what happened urgently, because clearly there are questions that need to be answered.
Rishi Sunak. Now, comments about Scotland's new hate crime law posted to social media by the author J.K. Rowling aren't criminal, according to Police Scotland. The new law was introduced yesterday and seeks to ban hatred against people on certain grounds. But the Harry Potter author says it risks silencing genuine debate on issues around gender, as well as ignoring the rights of women and girls. The Prime Minister has backed those concerns, saying people shouldn't be criminalised for stating simple biological fact. Finland is to observe a day of mourning tomorrow after a 12-year-old child was killed and 2 others were seriously wounded in a shooting that was carried out by another child at a primary school north of Helsinki. It's understood a permit for the handgun that used to belong to a relative of the suspect was found. Police say the 12-year-old boy has admitted carrying out the shooting, but the exact circumstances in which it happened aren't yet clear. Sports brand Adidas says it's going to redesign its German football shirts featuring the number 44 amid concerns over a resemblance to the Nazi SS symbol. The new kits were launched last month ahead of Germany hosting the European Championship. But a historian flagged similarities with the SS logo. Of course, that was the Nazi Germany elite military guard under Hitler. The country's football association now says it didn't spot the striking similarities when the design was first approved, but it will now be changed. Good news for house hunters here in the UK. Mortgage approvals have hit a 17-month high, and that coincides with a fall in house prices. According to the Bank of England, mortgage approvals rose to their highest level since the market turmoil sparked by Liz Truss's mini-budget. And house prices fell by 0.2% in March. That means the average price of a home in Britain is now just over £260,000. The government's faced criticism today of its plan to expand funded childcare for working parents, and in the very first week of it being rolled out across England. Meeting parents in Hartlepool this morning, the Prime Minister rejected claims that nurseries just can't cope with increasing demand as a result of the new policy. Rishi Sunak says the package of support for families has been introduced in stages to give time for more places to be made available at nurseries. But the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, says it shows the Conservatives are out of touch.
It's not just about registering, it's about whether the childcare is actually there. And in community after community, people are finding that there aren't the nursery places, there aren't the childminders, and parents are very disappointed, actually. They've been promised help by the Conservatives, but childcare is in chaos under the Conservatives, and it needs dramatic reform.
So Ed Davey. Now, have you ever gone incognito while using Google Chrome as a browser? Well, your private information may just have been stored anyway by the tech giant. But now, thanks to a US court ruling, Google will be forced to delete all private user data which wasn't supposed to have been tracked. And despite the case being filed in the States, the judgment will also apply internationally, including here in the UK. Google dismissed the merits of the case, saying it involved only old technical data that was never associated with individuals. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Very good evening. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. With me this evening and all week, Bev Turner. With me tonight, my panel, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and former Editor of Labourist, Peter Edwards. Good evening, gentlemen. Don't forget, you can get in touch with us all evening, gbviews@gbnews.com or on Twitter @GBNews. So, Rishi Sunak has entered the fray, defending J.K. Rowling after the author highlighted the potential ridiculousness of the new hate crime law that's now in effect in Scotland. Sunak has said people should not be criminalised for stating simple facts on biology. This is, of course, in relation to the transgender debate. A Police Scotland spokesperson has said, "We have received complaints in relation to the social media posts. The comments are not assessed to be criminal and no further action will be taken." That is very latest line on this, because, of course, J.K. Rowling put lots of tweets on her Twitter account when this came into force yesterday on the 1st of April. And she cited, here we go, this was one of the first ones, Scotland's Hate Crime Act, she said, comes into effect today. Women gain no additional protections, of course, but well-known trans activist Beth Douglas, darling of prominent blah, 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 lovely Scottish lass and convicted double rapist Isla Bryson found her true, authentic female self. And she said so to respect Isla's pronouns, etc. And fragile flower Kateley Dolatowski, 6'5", was rightly sent to a women's prison in Scotland. So what she's doing here is she is listing the various individuals, transgender people who have been in trouble with the law for, in some cases, sexual offences. And then at the end of it, she says, and I don't believe that these are women, so come and arrest me. Peter, let me come to you. We now know that she won't be investigated by the police. But was she right to raise awareness of this potentially tyrannical piece of law dressed up as concern for vulnerable people?
I think it's a badly drafted law by the Scottish Government, and as I understand it, the police in Scotland have said they may have to investigate fewer crimes like burglaries in order to pursue hate crimes of this nature under the new offence. J.K. Rowling, you know, she's a respected author, she's gender critical, she's entitled to her views. I think I might have put them slightly differently if I was her. She's named 10 people. As I understand it, not all of them have criminal convictions, but several of them do. I think this is such a grave matter, and we're concerned about dignity of trans women, but also the safety of women born female. Before you even get on to how you look after children who are going through these issues, you know, permanent medical changes and so on and so on. I think J.K. Rowling is completely entitled to raise it. I think she could have done it a little bit differently, perhaps with a bit more sensitivity.
But she would say, I guess, that in terms of this debate, she has rarely shown any sensitivity from the other side. From
yes, she's faced terrible abuse, and I think that's also the concern I have, that it's a very inflamed argument. I don't think this new law introduced by Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf is going to change things. We already know there's so many other areas of public services failing in Scotland, and there's a crisis in drug deaths, and it's incredibly sad and grim that J.K. Rowling has faced such abuse. I think she could have put the point slightly differently. But you say this hasn't been... The law in itself is not worded correctly. But do we need a law to police hate? Because you can't stop people hating. It's a normal, natural emotion. And if you carry out a violent act, that's a crime. If you threaten a person, that's a crime. But just saying things surely is not... We don't need this sort of legislation, do we? I can't see the case for it. Now, people will say you shouldn't criminalise language, but some language, as you rightly said, is already criminal. If we have a dispute and they say to you, I'm going to thump you, and you believe that and take it seriously, then that probably is a crime because you're in fear of your safety. But this seems to be something different about criminalising thoughts and beliefs. Well, if you do actually thump me during the show tonight, Peter, that would be a first. But, Henry, let me come to you. What do you make of it all? Because you presumably, like me, find it quite chilling that we've got this legislation at all.
Yeah, I think that, as you say, most, not all, but most law focuses on behaviour, right? Because you can't really police motivations. You certainly can't police motivations fairly. And I think that's what's really being highlighted by this. As it is, it's a very badly drafted law. It's not clear what the definition of hate crime is, what will qualify under it, which means that citizens can't preempt it, which is a problem for equality under the law. And what J.K. Rowling is doing is really she's forcing the Scottish Government to confront this really awful choice, right? Which is where either she pushes the boundaries of this law in relation to the trans question and they keep backing off, in which case the law increasingly becomes meaningless, at least within this sphere, or at some point the police bite the bullet and go to trial, which means that they're going to be going to trial with one of the wealthiest women in Britain, a very articulate advocate of her cause, and it would really be a bad press heyday for the law and the government. Now, it's not just this string of tweets. What J.K. Rowling has since said is that if any woman is prosecuted under this law for expressing I suppose, gender-critical beliefs, she will repeat that woman's words on Twitter and in the media, and then the police will have to charge both of them. So it really is a gauntlet thrown down in a way that I don't think we've really seen very often, this kind of a single individual challenging a government like this.
But wonderful, I think. I mean, as a woman, I'm very reassured that there is such a powerful and wealthy woman out there who isn't afraid to be litigious if the time comes and to take on any sort of challenge against her. But I wonder whether it's all a little bit of a distraction, Peter, from what this it is a snooper's charter, because in Scotland people are being encouraged, aren't they, to if you hear somebody say something that might stir up hatred, this is the phrase, it could be judged by a reasonable person, A, what's a reasonable person, and B, stirring up hatred, well, that could mean anything, against people of protected characteristics. And we're looking at a kind of two-tier society here, where you've got people of religious, any particular religion, or sexual orientation, disability or gender identity protected, whereas you two wouldn't be protected under this sort of law. I wouldn't as a straight, white woman either. So do we need it for anybody?
Well, there's a political debate around it that we've just been having, but there's also a lawyer's debate, and it's a very boring word, but it does come back to drafting, because there are these ambiguities within it, as you picked out. And another one is what constitutes a public statement, you know? So if you go on TV or in a town hall meeting, that's definitely public. What about if you're talking to your family at home or somewhere semi-public, like a pub with your friends? I mean, I think that's really your point about snitching, that the Scottish Government, as with any law, they do a public campaign around it, and invite citizens to, in effect, shop other people living in Scotland for the wrong language.
So are you if you're terrified by this, and I am, and you are, who's in favour of this?
I'm not terrified of it, and perhaps for the reasons that Joanne Rowling was alluding to, that it's badly drafted and perhaps it's driven by political sentiment rather than by good law.
What would make it a better piece of legislation, in your opinion, then?
Well, I think you'll have to get a lawyer on the show for that, but I think what's come out in a lot of coverage today is that the ambiguities are manifest, and when you're a police officer being told to prosecute someone with a new law, the one thing you don't want is ambiguity. And J.K. Rowling, because she's a very intelligent person, don't agree with everything, but she's a very clever woman, she sniffed this out immediately. And that's obviously why she's vowing to repeat the words of anyone who is prosecuted. She's therefore further dampening down the likelihood of anyone being prosecuted.
I'm sure if you asked her, she would say she doesn't want to be involved in this at all. She never asked for any of this attention on this issue, but now she finds herself in it. Let's have a look what Humza Yousaf said today on his tweet. So this is the First Minister of Scotland, of course, who is celebrating this legislation. He says, "I do my best to shield my children from the racism and Islamophobia I face on a regular basis. That becomes increasingly difficult when racist graffiti targeting me appears near our family home. A reminder of why we must collectively take a zero-tolerance approach to hatred." And there was a picture on the front page of the newspaper, which I think we can see, which is of the graffiti outside his house. There we go. FM, First Minister targeted in racist graffiti on Ferry Wall. Now, this says an unkind word about Islam. But, Henry, that's a crime of graffiti, and he's using it as an excuse to push through this really draconian legislation. For me, the crime there is graffiti. People have always said unkind things in graffiti.
Well, it's also not just graffiti, it's targeted harassment, right? Especially if that's near his home. And again, that's an action, and that is a specific crime. That is somebody who is not just expressing an opinion about the First Minister, which they are entitled to do. It is somebody who is tracking him down, where his family is, and threatening him. It's exactly the same as threatening to thump someone in a way. So you're right. That is an example of something which is already covered and can be sensibly covered by criminal law, and it is being used to push through this insanely expansive police speech policing thing, which is also intensely subjective, because the test is very vague, but it's sort of, if someone if someone who had overheard it hypothetically could be offended by it, how do you know, right? And that completely demolishes the wall between private and public speech, because all of us, I imagine, say things in private with groups of people whom we know that we wouldn't say in a public forum. And if suddenly something in a private WhatsApp between you and somebody else can be published, and then somebody says, well, if someone else had been in that chat, they'd have been offended by it, and that's a crime, that is an extraordinary invasion of free speech.
And you can report anonymously, can't you? And if there isn't an actual level of crime, you're still recorded on the database as a hate incident.
But we've got to be clear, you know, however hopeless Hamza Yusuf is, no one should face racist graffiti, and no one should certainly face racist graffiti on their home or round the corner, because that is disgraceful.
It is disgraceful, but that's a matter of policing. That's local community. That's not necessarily a hate crime. People have always written... I went round Kenilworth Castle yesterday. It was very nice on my way back from the north down to the south. And in the walls there, from the 13th and 14th century, people have scraped their names and they've graffitied things, which were probably unkind about the royal family, especially around the Civil War at the time. This is something that human beings do.
It's not the same when it's on your home and a politician's been attacked physically.
But it isn't on his home and he hasn't been attacked physically. It says an unkind word, a swear word, about Islam. And the extrapolation is it's specifically at him. It doesn't even name him on this graffiti. And he's using that as a weapon to say, this, you see, this is why we need this terrible, tyrannical piece of legislation.
I would disaggregate those things, and you see it with...
He hasn't, though.
Well, you see it with sexist abuse as well, that sadly female legislators face abuse, whether they're in power or not, whether they're on the front bench, whether they're in a cabinet, when they're backbench. There's this tiny minority of aggressive folk that spray abuse around verbally, electronically, and in some cases on walls, regardless of the kind of laws introduced by the people they're insulting.
I think the bit I also find baffling, Henry, is this idea that you can stop hate by stopping people talking. Because for me, hate speech is only solved by more speech.
It is I think it's a real problem, because if you think about it, objectively speaking, is this country or any other Western country more or less prejudiced than it was 20 or 30 years ago?
Apparently not, if you look at the figures.
But it, you know, in terms of day-to-day experience, people's experience of racism, it definitely still happens, but compared to the past. But the problem now is that with the internet, we're also connected. One, minority groups with hateful attitudes find it much easier to connect to each other, right? 20 years ago, you might have had a really negative opinion of Islam or whatever, but you were probably going to say that everywhere, and therefore you wouldn't have found other people, but people can find each other, and then they can project at politicians and at us. And so a small minority of people can project onto the internet all of their bile, and it looks like a much bigger problem than perhaps it is. Now, it is important that we maintain a zero tolerance towards this kind of thing in public space, because, of course, the people in the 13th and 14th century who were doing that graffiti were killing each other in religious wars, right? Like, the hatred can have real consequences.
Yeah. But we're not doing that now.
But precisely.
Or not here, at least.
But it is important that we separate that from this kind of legislation, which is just a grotesque overreach, because ultimately people are not and cannot be compelled by law to think good thoughts in their private lives.
Correct. Right, let us know at home what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. And when you think about the conversation we've just been having about the fact that we're all frightened of everything, and you remember sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, that isn't the case anymore, is it? And maybe that's partly why Generation Z, that's the under 27s, don't have the resilience, the work ethic. They're lazy and they don't even bother to turn up for their first day at work. Why? We're going to be considering that. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, on GB News.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Now, the massive debate back across the pond is NATO. Yeah. Everyone's talking NATO every day. It was your comments about them not paying enough, not paying 2%. And you said this, you said it again recently. You made a comment, well, the Russians can do whatever they want if these guys don't pay. Well, that's now being used.
Well, they can use it. I don't really care if they use it, because what I'm saying is that's a form of negotiation. Why should we guard these countries that have a lot of money? And the United States was paying for most of NATO. And when I went there, and I already had it out with them, and now they stopped paying again. But now they're paying because of those comments that you saw 2-3 weeks ago. The question was asked by the head of a major country in front of everyone else, 28 countries at the time, including us. They said, so if we don't pay our bills, are you going to protect us from Russia? I said, you mean you're delinquent? You're not paying the bills? Yes. Nope, I'm not going to pay you. We're not going to do it. We're not going to defend you. If you're not paying your bills, we're not going to defend you. It's very simple. And hundreds of billions of dollars came flowing in. Now, if I say, yes, I am, they're not going to pay their bills. Why would they do that? NATO has to treat the U.S. fairly, because if it's not for the United States, NATO literally doesn't even exist. but they took advantage of us, like most countries do.
If they start to pay their bills properly and the club is fair, are places like Poland defended? Will America be there?
I believe the United States was paying 90% of NATO, the cost of NATO. It could be 100%. It was the most unfair thing. And don't forget, it's more important to them than it is to us. We have an ocean in between some problems. It's more important for them. They were taking advantage, and they did. They took advantage of us on trade, and they took advantage on
So if they play fair, if they start to play fair, America's there?
Yes, 100%, 100%.
Thank you.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, and keeping me company until 7 o'clock, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and former Editor of Labourlist, Peter Edwards. Right, now, Generation Z. They are aged between 12 and 27. There are currently 3 million of them not in work or employment, which is about 25% of the total. They are lazy, they are weak, and they constantly feel sorry for themselves. So why would anyone give Generation Z a job? Henry, let me come to you first. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
Oh, I mean, I'm older than that.
You're older than that, OK.
Sure.
OK, he's being coy about his age. Yeah. So do you work with Generation Zers, and what do you find when you do?
I mean, I work with, we have one on the team at Conservative Home, but I remember when people were saying all of this about millennials, which I am one, so I'm always slightly sceptical. I mean, I think the challenge that they face compared to previous generations is obviously COVID had a huge impact. But if you think about it, more of them go to university, whereas previously many of them would have gone straight from school, which is a relatively structured environment, into employment. And university is a great chance to unlearn the habits of structure, as I learned when I went. They are in an environment where there's no wage growth. There hasn't been wage growth since 2008. Cost of living is higher than ever. And, as is alluded to in this piece, they are increasingly using different forms of communication to what we did. You know, I had a Nokia when I started, which gives you a clearer idea of what my age is. Whereas now, it is a challenge getting some of them to pick up the phone. That's one thing I have found. It's like, have you got in touch with them? I've sent them an email and then sent them a WhatsApp. I'll send them a second. It's like, call them.
Yeah.
But these are things that you learn. And I think that the important thing, however frustrating it sometimes is when you're reading these stories, and it must be frustrating for employers, is that if 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds are arriving in the world of work unready for it, that's because they haven't had the opportunity to learn those things along the way. And that's where I think we need to look. Employers could also do more. It's not their job, fundamentally, to do that raising of people. That's the job of schools, universities and parents. And if so many young people are simply ill-equipped to work in an office environment, that is something that needs to be fixed before they get there.
Well, I guess what they might say to that is, I don't want to work in an office environment. An office environment is not for me. And that's what some of this research has been finding out, that they just don't see the world of work in the same way. The generational shift, there's always been a bit of a paradigm shift, hasn't there, Peter, in terms of generations of how we view work, whether you wanted to go down and, you know, dig coal out, and the next generation will think that was ridiculous. But this feels like a profound shift.
Yeah, it's profound post-COVID, and I think Henry teased out a lot of the issues very well, because this is a much bigger social change. Some of it is economic, so, you know, Generation Z, young folk, harder than ever probably for that generation to buy a home, and if you're lucky enough to go to university, the debt is colossal from student fees and living, and that is a millstone around your neck. Similarly, when I started in the workplace as a reporter, you know, close to 20 years ago, sometimes, very occasionally, people would say, Peter, your work is... And then they'd use a very rude word that I can't repeat on this show. So clearly, things like that being eradicated, that's a good sign, because you shouldn't get like a ton of bad language when you get feedback.
But that's just good, robust feedback, and that's why they can't take it, because no one's honest with them anymore.
But then the other things that come under respect mean, for the Gen Zer, if you're not turning up to something, you should put in a call and say you're not coming and apologise and try and rearrange or explain why. So the idea that you get a job offer and then don't even turn up and don't tell the company is absolutely dire. And then, as Henry says, you know, we've both worked for small businesses, often very stressful and fast-moving. If there's an emergency, you know, like shortage of money or the product you sell, and one colleague is sending a WhatsApp to another, dear me, you have to be able to pick up the phone in pretty much any job in the country, and that's a vital skill.
Yeah, my 3 teenagers, not one of them really makes a phone call to a friend. They don't make a phone call. There are people, which means they don't make a phone call. They've all got smartphones and they're all just Snapchatting each other on little messages. And so when there's a job that needs to be sought, I think my children would be nervous to make a phone call.
But a lot of my generation, when you first started, because even, you know, back then it was less common, and so there is that initial nervousness, but it's something you get over by doing, right? It's very quick. Once you've done a few phone calls, especially if you're in a job that requires it, you get over it very quickly and you realise, actually, it's a much more effective way of getting things done. It pins somebody down time-wise. I think that the challenge really is, one, working from home. Look, Con Home works from home, so I'm absolutely not on the no one should work from home brigade. But I think for younger workers, there are considerable downsides, which is simply that you don't get acculturated into the world of work. You miss out on the social opportunities that you often get in the office when you're younger, and on being visible in front of your boss and the ability to learn and get feedback. And I also think that whilst it's definitely true, it's good that people aren't slinging swear words at each other anymore, I do think that perhaps these days the ability to give robust feedback has maybe been got rid of too much. You now have to sort of pussyfoot around a little bit. You read it about the sort of the decline of the school report, for example. You read these scathing reviews that politicians and famous figures used to get from their teachers back in the day. That's now no longer done. And I think that whilst it's never pleasant, certainly I've never found it pleasant, receiving direct feedback when you've done something wrong is actually the best way to go about it. Whereas a more,
We've got we've got loads of emails coming in, and Sienna, good evening, Sienna. She said, I said 20 years ago, if we keep wrapping kids in cotton wool, we're going to end up with a generation of weak adults, she said. And here we are. Something has fundamentally changed, and I do think lockdowns had a massive impact on this generation. There was 2 years where they didn't do work experience, and actually they really enjoy just sitting in their room and doing absolutely nothing. And we got them used to that, and I think that's very hard to break. But there is something about wrapping them in cotton wool. I think it happened under Tony Blair.
I don't think it's anything particularly Tony Blair. I think it's something much bigger, that's social change, economic change and technology, which I think we've got to treat. You know, what's that phrase from Shakespeare about, you know, technology is our servant, not our master. Something like this.
Was that from Shakespeare?
Yeah, but he said it about alcohol. I think. He didn't use the word boss, but it was like what was it, a poor boss or whatever, good servant. But I can only speak from my own experience. You know, when I was a trainee reporter on newspapers 20 years ago, I picked up a landline telephone, rang people up and asked some questions, and I learnt from that. But I also learnt from the other 20 people in the office who'd been doing that for 30 years, listening to how they did it. I think that's true in most jobs, you know, teaching, public services. It's certainly true if you're driving a bus. Maybe one or two things, you know, internet-related roles, you can do a lot more from home. But when you're a trainee in anything, you've got to be around people who are veterans.
And you speak, Henry, to this idea that there's just not much point. Like you say, the wages haven't gone up. They look at homes, and we're going to be talking about tax on second homes in a minute. They look at buying a house, they think, I'm never going to be able to afford a deposit of 100 grand or 50 grand to get a house. So what do they have to aim for? I think a lot of them have just completely lowered their standards. They've got everything they want in the palm of their hand. This is their entertainment. And somehow we have to wake them up and put a rocket up their backsides to get out and get a job.
Yeah, but I think part of that is making the rewards tangible and affordable, right? You know, it makes sense to an extent. I think it's bad in many ways, but it makes sense to an extent. If you're a young person today, because of fees, you're going to be paying a higher marginal tax rate than your older colleagues. You no longer get sort of, your wages don't go up every year. The only way you get a pay increase is by moving job, which you have to do, therefore, quite aggressively if you're really ambitious in terms of your pay. A house, especially in London or the South East, where a lot of the jobs are, is decades away, if not an inheritance. Like, if housing were affordable and you could grow, you could get the milestones of maturity that we used to associate with adulthood, people work for them. If you think saving up for 5 years is enough for a mortgage, people will do it. But if you ask somebody in their early 20s who's already not got much money, oh, well, if you save up for 20 years with your very small amount of disposable income, maybe you'll be able to buy a house. Of course they're going to spend that money on other things. And the thing about internet and phone entertainment is that once you've got the thing, it's free. Right? That's why they're there. If you've got a games console or a computer, that's a one-off expense, and then you can play it for as long as you like. So we need to make our cities, and indeed our country, more affordable, and then that will create an incentive structure for young people to go out there and earn money.
Where do they get their incentive from at the moment as well, Peter? Because this idea of a hard day's work being good for the soul, fully believe that. But if you look at their generation of Instagrammers and YouTubers, their job, and it baffles me, but their job is often just filming their day. Some of the people my kids look up to, when I say, what do they do? Well, they're an Instagrammer. What does that mean? Well, they get up in the morning, they film their breakfast, they tell you what they're wearing.
This is a point about role models, isn't it? Because most of us are not Instagrammers, and I never will be a trend sensation for anyone and so on. I think even when I was growing up, role models were people on TV and footballers and everything else. But I actually think role models should be the people in your community, a parent, a friend, someone you do a sports with, could be someone from a religious institution. It shouldn't be someone that's so distant in Hollywood or in Wembley Stadium, because in reality, most of us aren't going to play football for England or go to Hollywood. We're going to work in the public sector or in a small business.
But they're not kicking a ball with the best 22 players in the world. They're literally just filming themselves doing their mundane day-to-day stuff. And so they look at that and go, well, that looks like an easy job.
Well, I think that's part of it. But if you think about it, it's aspirational, right? Because we've always had this. We've always had people, you know, we all used to watch the big programmes about rich people renovating their houses and so on. You know, they weren't houses we could afford, but we enjoyed it. There were magazines where we got looks into stars' lives. And I think that this is kind of the same thing, right? Because a lot of these influencers, what they're doing, you know, they go on holidays, they have nice flats, they're able to get the clothes they want. They're kind of just living, it's an aspirational thing. They're living the life that many of these people wish they could live. It's just quite sad that whereas a generation ago it was a big house, it's now just living a fairly aesthetic version of a normal life.
Yeah, because I was going to say, because at least the people who were in the magazines and on the programmes were famous for something. They were
not in the big house shows, they were just rich.
Yeah, but they were rich because they'd worked hard at something, be that a business, or they were singers or actors, or, you know, so they had a profession. Whereas because of social media now and monetising social media, these Gen Zers can just literally broadcast their day.
Get kids off mobile phones. It'll help with a lot of social problems.
Couldn't agree more.
Mobile phones.
Ban them for the under-16s, would you?
I'd make them telephone and text only, but take the internet off them. You know, if you're a teenager walking home, it's good to have something you can ring an emergency.
Yeah.
But, you know, we'd all like to keep our kids.
There's no political will for that, is there? Because that is a big part of this story. A big part of why Generation Z are lazy is because they're all tech zombies.
Well, how do you do it, right? Because the thing is, you can ban it in controlled environments like schools. But how do you ban smartphones for under-16s? Because the social and parental pressure will still be there. You're not going to, you can't have an end user checking when you're at the Apple store. Like, you're not going to give this to your 14-year-old daughter, are you? Like, they can't check. I don't think you can. How? If I go and buy an iPhone, what's Apple going to do? Do they check up? Is there a random inspection?
But it should become socially unacceptable for the under-16s. It should become like watching a 14-year-old smoking at the dinner table. It should be that socially unacceptable to have an iPhone, a smartphone.
I mean, in fairness, given how conformist they are, I think a 14-year-old smoking at the dinner table, if they are,
you'd find it quite refreshing.
Yeah, there's someone
We're not condoning that, everybody.
It's too expensive for kids.
Well, this is also true. Right, Peter and Emily, thank you for having just a minute, we're going to talk about the fact that 3/4 of England's second homeowners are set to be charged double council tax next year. Is that the right way to save communities, particularly in beautiful parts of our country, or is it an assault on aspiration? And stick around also for a message from Michelle Dewberry from her holiday. Is she a badly behaved Brit abroad? We'll find out in just a minute. This is Bev Turner on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Yes, there will be some drier, brighter weather around across southern parts tomorrow, but first there's quite a bit of rain to come, driven by an area of low pressure and an associated frontal system that's sweeping up from the southwest, bringing outbreaks of rain for many, though initially tonight there will be some dry weather across parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England, though the outbreaks of rain arriving here, and across eastern parts of Scotland some persistent rain could actually bring some hill snow over the highest ground. Across the far northwest of Scotland there may be a touch of frost first thing tomorrow morning, otherwise Wednesday gets off to a mild, cloudy and rather damp start for many. Outbreaks of rain which could turn heavy and persistent across parts of Northern Ireland and southern Scotland through the morning. They will continue across many northern areas into the afternoon, though breaking up a little bit. Across more central and southern parts of England and Wales, turning drier, a few showers but also some decent bright sunny spells in which it should feel relatively warm with highs around 16 Celsius but markedly colder than this further north. More unsettled weather to come as we go through Thursday. Watch out for some heavy outbreaks of rain sweeping their way from west to east across southern parts of England, with further outbreaks of rain further north too, and more persistent rain pushing in from the southwest later on. And the unsettled theme continues as we head towards the weekend. Could turn very windy in fact by Saturday, but temperatures rising, likely to get to 20 Celsius. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
A very good evening to you. My name is Johnny Ratner. Major problems in North Yorkshire continue north of Thirsk. The A19 remains shut near to the North Allison turn-off following a serious accident. On the M62 in Greater Manchester, the westbound entry slip road is blocked at junction 20. The Rochdale exit at the scene of a crash, and long queues heading north up the M6 through Cheshire towards Lymm at the M56, where the outside lane's coned off following an accident. South East London, the South Circular at Eltham is closed southbound off the A2 following an accident. Long clockwise queues on the M25 on the western stretch, 13 to 14 in Staines and Heathrow, where the two outside lanes are closed off following an accident, and long queues of well over an hour on the M3 heading away from London, 3 to 4 between Bagshot and Camberley. 3 lanes on that 4-lane stretch closed after a lorry caught fire. London Overground trains are still disrupted. No service Euston to Kilburn Hythe Road. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good evening. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, tonight, keeping me company until 7. Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and former Editor of Labourist, Peter Edwards. Now, if you own a second home, lucky you, but you could be facing an 80% increase on your council tax for that property. As many as 130,000 properties will be affected by the rise, which is estimated to raise at least £215 million for councils. So, should second homes be taxed more? Henry, let me come to you. I sympathise with the rural communities for whom family members can find it very difficult to get on the property ladder, because you've got people who live in London who've bought up a lovely big second home and they rent it out, let's say, with a local agency. However, I do still want to live in a country where you want to work hard enough to be able to afford something as luxurious as a second home.
I mean, I think second homes should be way more common than they are, really. If we didn't have a housing crisis, France, same population as us, twice the number of second homes, right? Especially, you know, you should be able to have a pied-à-terre in London where you just have a little flat and then your family home is outside if you work. All of that should be doable, and it's not, because we have a housing crisis and a massive shortage. Now, there are genuine problems here. I think the most sympathetic case is probably Airbnb, because that has led to, it was originally just people had a nice way to let their flat if they were away for a week, and it's turned into basically a vehicle for large corporate landlords to take a large amount of housing stock in cities. That's a problem. But the issue we have here is a lot of the most heavily affected communities, like Cornwall, they are also reliant on tourist income, right? That's from the holiday lets, that's from the second homes.
Yeah.
And if you crack down on that, you'll raise, most councils will only raise a few tens of thousands in revenue, but you will lose much more in economic activity. So where the pressure is greatest, they need to build more homes. And if a council is not building more homes, I have no sympathy for it on the question of second homes.
Let's have a look at some of the numbers on this, because we were thinking about whether this doubling of council tax would make any difference if you're wealthy enough to own a second house. So here we have a house in Padstow in Cornwall, very sought-after area. A detached 5-bedroom family home could cost you 2.4 million quid, and the council tax there would be Band F, which was about £3,000, £3,383. But you would get, if you let that house out, £3,000 to £6,000 per week. So if you double the council tax there to, say, £7,000 a year, Peter, it's still, you're going to still pay that back with 1 week's full rental at peak season.
Well, this is a key thing, and it goes to politics underlying it, that there isn't much political sympathy for landlords, whether they're an elderly couple with, you know, one investment property, or it's something like holiday lets, or the really rich who just live in homes in 2 different places in London, Monday to Thursday, and the beautiful countryside the rest of the time. But I think your example made the point, although most second homes aren't 2.4 million, they're worth much, much, much less. But even if you own 2 homes, say, at 300k, and you've got a capital of 600k, an extra bill of £2,000 is minuscule in proportion to that. And this really goes to the point that the government is much poorer. I think, obviously, post-COVID, it's even worse, but the Tories have continued to run a deficit. In reality, whoever had been in government after COVID, it would have been very, very difficult to run any kind of surplus. So the government has got poorer. They've transferred a lot of that pre- and post-COVID onto local authorities who've had a budget cut of about 40%. So councils are looking for revenue raises, because we all know your bin collection is now once every 2 or 3 weeks rather than weekly. So councils are poorer. That flows from central government. Councils are basically sticking their fingers down the back of the sofa looking for a few pennies. But it seems like this will just be a few pennies in relative terms.
But then that is just using it as a money-making scheme as opposed to changing the landscape of home ownership, isn't it? It's just it feels just another tax on people working really hard. Let's look at another example. So Coniston in the Lake District. Beautiful part of the world. So if you had a house in Coniston that's, let's say, it cost £375,000 for a 3-bed end of terrace, your council tax, £1,700 a year. If you double that to whatever it is, 3,400, we've got the holiday let in Padstow there. But it's going to be a lot less. I think the holiday let for Coniston was about between £500 and £1,000 a week, so much less. But you're still going to cover your cost of increasing council tax with the revenue from your holiday let. So it's not going to make any difference to people saying, oh, I'm going to have to sell my second home because I can't afford double council tax.
No, I mean, if anything, it might induce some people who just have a second home as a second home to look at making that revenue option, right? To go to Airbnb or another one and be like, OK, if we let it out for 3 weeks of the year, we'll cover the costs. But I think that the point is that the councils are running out of money, and that we're now increasingly desperately trying to find ways to postpone a reckoning with them running out of money, because it will be absolutely horrifying. Nearly all of their budget is consumed by social care, special educational needs, and a couple of other central government responsibilities. The government has recently allowed more than a decent number of them to start selling assets to cover costs, which is an absolute insolvency spiral. This is not going to change very much. And I think the problem is, as I alluded to earlier, if you did something that was sweeping enough to actually change things, in many tourism-dependent bits of the country, what you would actually be doing is killing the local economy, which would make housing affordable, but would come at a terrible cost.
Would kill the restaurants and the pubs and everything else. OK, all right, thanks, guys. We're going to take another quick break. Are British people terrible tourists? We're going to be seeing from one very familiar face to you, because according to locals in Tenerife, Germans are a higher class of tourist than us Brits. I'm offended. This is Dewbs & Co with Bev Turner on GB News.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Men's mental health, men are starting to talk a lot more. You've been through a lot of stuff that people don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, the last few years for me have been very, very difficult. People see me on tour, performing, making music, but myself and my wife, you know, we went through 2 miscarriages. You know, and you know, for us, that was a very devastating time and very difficult to know how to kind of process those emotions. And I guess as a man, I did the thing of bottling up my emotions, and where I feel comfortable to be able to express myself is in the studio, whereas, you know, she had obviously a different reaction to, you know, what happened to us, because not only was it happening to her mentally, psychologically, but it was happening to her physically as well. And I think something that she really wanted to see from me was that sensitivity and that emotion. And I thought that as a man, being strong was trying to bottle up my emotions and just show her that, no, you know, that I'm being strong for her. But actually being strong is talking about it. And what's happened ever since I've started to talk about it is I've spoken to more men that have experienced baby loss. My wife forced out of me, you know, how do you feel? And I ended up as a mess on the floor. I was exasperating, crying, almost inconsolable. She was just holding me in her arms as we cried together, and we cried together. And I didn't realise I needed that release so badly. Like I said, I've been able to speak to other men, and we've been able to cry together, and they shared their own experiences, which they did similar to me. But actually, you know, as men, I feel like that conversation and that sensitivity and being able to be emotional together.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
This is James & Co with me, Bev Turner. This week, while Michelle is on holiday, Henry Hill and Peter Edwards are still here. Now, residents of Tenerife have said that they would like a higher class of tourist, please. Locals say they want to attract more discerning visitors who would appreciate the Canary Islands culture and food more than a dominant influx from the UK. So why do Brits abroad have such a terrible reputation? Well, the one and only Michelle Dewberry has sent us a message from her sun lounger in the Canaries.
Bev and Kurt, it's me, Michelle Dewberry. I'm missing you all, and I hope you had a fantastic Easter. I'm in the Canary Islands, but I didn't dare go to Tenerife because apparently us Brits abroad are not welcome. So, you know what? I came to Lanzarote instead. I can't talk about us Brits not liking the culture, but I certainly can comment on the cheap booze. I like it. Cheers to you all.
She likes the cheap booze. That is part of the problem, Peter, isn't it? Why, as Brits, do we go away and drink so heavily and get ourselves into such terrible situations?
Well, I'm not sure we all do, but there is this British myth, perhaps for certainly people under the age of 30, you know, starting from your A-levels onwards, of go to somewhere very hot. You know, it was £1 a pint in my day, maybe it'd be a little bit more now, and then you have a kebab and spew up in the streets, and you can understand why maybe people that live there don't like that very much. There's always, I think, tension with tourists. I think the story fuels a bit of myth because when people go away as families, they behave in a different way. And there's lots of retirees who go and live in all these places like the Canaries and Tenerife and Spain for a quieter life and behave in a respectful way. And I think it goes back to that word respect. You can go and have a good time. And I certainly went to Greece, you know, when I was a student, had a few drinks, but show some kindness and respect to the people who are putting you up.
I mean, look, 6.5 million people visited Tenerife last year from the UK, up 11%. It's still very popular with us, Henry, particularly at this time of the year, a bit of sort of spring or winter sunshine. I went, when was it? In half-term in February, and you still can spot a Brit abroad, can't you, compared to the Spanish and the Germans. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. You can just see we're always the ones who've got a tan and we've not put on the suntan lotion and we've got very pink vest marks. And we enjoy our holidays, but are we Do we just somehow let ourselves go in a way that other European countries don't?
There definitely seems to be a minority of people who do. There's enough for it to be an observable sort of phenomenon. I couldn't tell you how many. I think the problem in the Canary Islands is that there are different models of tourism that you can follow, and the Canary Islands has gone for volume. They get a lot of people in. And reading this story, what really seems to be the locus of local anger is that that is having all the effects that you would expect. There is not enough housing, rents are spiralling out of control, there is vast amounts of sewage being generated and not enough facilities to process it, and that is a real pressure. But of course, they face exactly the same problem that places like Cornwall do, which is that they're dependent on the tourist income.
Yeah.
And I think the other problem that maybe exacerbates this is that in areas like the Canary Islands, where you get a lot of Brits going, partly maybe because we speak, we tend less to speak foreign languages in other countries, you do tend to get little monocultures going, right? Instead of going to a Spanish restaurant or whatever, there will be English-speaking English businesses, and you just go to those, and I don't think that helps. But that's simply, again, a phenomenon of the sheer number of Brits that go. I imagine if there are places in the world where, where other nationalities choose to holiday, and you will find businesses catering to them. So it is unfortunate, but ultimately this is a problem of governance for the Canary Islands, right? They should have been doing a better job of making this volume of tourism, which they need for money, work for local people.
One of our viewers, Irene, says we've travelled widely throughout our lives to various countries, but in the past 25 years we've avoided certain places abroad due to the embarrassing Brits. Do you think is it getting worse?
Well, as Henry says, how can you measure it? I mean, there's some of us who are blessed or cursed with a totally red face once we get any Mediterranean sunness, and I'm definitely...
So you're one of those with bright pink shoulders on day 2 then, Peter?
Yes, but I'd also say in my defence, the last time I drank too much on holiday was probably about 20 or 22 years ago. So we all get more sensible as we get older. There's another point I want to pick up briefly. I read that lots of time when you read things like money pages and travel pages, when they add up the cost of going away in Britain, with a train across Britain, say somewhere like Cornwall, and then a hotel, when we all want to support the British hotel industry, a lot of the conclusions come out saying, well, it is just a bit cheaper to take a family of 4 to Tenerife because the flights are much cheaper. Once you're there, the food is much less.
I think you're right. That is, so we should be encouraging, but then do we want our Larry Brits to be here on the beach in Cornwall and rather than in Lanzarote?
Well, only if we've built enough housing, because otherwise all of that's going to get even worse, and we'll have Cornwall Council trying to find a way to tax them. So.
Yeah. Well, if you are booking your holiday this summer, just think about the fact that if you get to Tenerife, there might be the locals there. Apparently there's flyers on the lampposts and everything saying, "Go home, Brits, we don't want you here." Do you think it's a Brexit thing as well? We really alienated ourselves.
No, it doesn't read at all like a Brexit. Also, we don't know how many flyers. One person can put up flyers, right? I think it's important to say we don't know how widespread this is. There are lots of legitimate concerns in this movement, as well as the tourism phobia. But no, this reads very much like the Canary Islands have simply not... The government of the Canary Islands has not catered to the number of people that are coming in.
OK, all right, thank you both. Peter Edwards, Henry Hill there. I'll be back on Britain's Newsroom tomorrow morning at 9:30 and back here tomorrow evening at 6, but next...
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Yes, there will be some drier, brighter weather around across southern parts tomorrow, but first there's quite a bit of rain to come, driven by an area of low pressure and an associated frontal system that's sweeping up from the southwest, bringing outbreaks of rain for many, though initially tonight there will be some dry weather across parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England, though the outbreaks of rain arriving here, and across eastern parts of Scotland some persistent rain could actually bring some hill snow over the highest ground. Across the far northwest of Scotland there may be a touch of frost first thing tomorrow morning, otherwise Wednesday gets off to a mild, cloudy and rather damp start for many. Outbreaks of rain which could turn heavy and persistent across parts of Northern Ireland and southern Scotland through the morning. They will continue across many northern areas into the afternoon, though breaking up a little bit. Across more central and southern parts of England and Wales, turning drier, a few showers but also some decent bright sunny spells in which it should should feel relatively warm with highs around 16 Celsius, but markedly colder than this further north. More unsettled weather to come as we go through Thursday. Watch out for some heavy outbreaks of rain sweeping their way from west to east across southern parts of England, with further outbreaks of rain further north too, and more persistent rain pushing in from the southwest later on. And the unsettled theme continues as we head towards the weekend. Could turn very windy, in fact, by Saturday, but temperatures rising, likely to get to 20 Celsius. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
A very good evening to you. I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in North Yorkshire continue to the north of Thirsk. The A19 has been closed since just after 4 o'clock by the North Allerton turnoff. A collision continues to be investigated. Routes through North Allerton absolutely solid as a result. On the cameras on the western stretch of the clockwise M25, very slow 13 to 14 between Staines and the Heathrow exit. The two outside lanes coned off past the scene of an accident. North London at Highbury, Green Road is blocked eastbound by a collision. South East London, the South Circular at Eltham is blocked southbound off the A2 following an accident. Long queues on the M3 heading away from London through Surrey. Just 2 lanes are closed now. 3 to 4 between Bagshot and Camberley for recovery work after a lorry caught fire. And there are delays of an hour on train services between London Euston and Watford Junction due to early signalling problems also affecting London Overground. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
You could win our biggest prize giveaway so far. First, there's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got